Hello, Social Room members, and welcome to our very first Behind the Blog series. And thank you for being part of this. Right now, we're just going to give a few minutes just until everybody logs in. That way we can start with everybody. So just hang on with us, and thank you for being here. Okay, so far we have some people. We will wait for some more, and then we will begin. What do you think, Jeremy? Should we begin?
Sure, why not?
Okay. Well, hi, everybody, and thank you again for being part of this. My name is Gabriela Corral, and today I'm interviewing Jeremy Scrivens. As you can see, he's the director of the Emotional Economy at Work, and I'm interviewing him on his recent blog, Why Health Equity is Too Important to Leave to the Usual Suspects. How are you doing today, Jeremy? I know it's early for you.
Yes, the sun's not quite risen here in Melbourne, Australia, but it'll be a nice warm day, so doing well, thank you.
I'm glad you're doing well. Okay, so let's begin talking about your blog, Jeremy. Tell us a little bit about your blog and where you got your inspiration from to begin with.
Well, I got it actually from the work we did as a host team in the Equity at Work social room, which we started up as a group in Miami back in July last year, where a group of us got together and to a question that we asked each other, which was if we could change the world to make the world a better place using social media to collaborate at scale, what would the story be? And it was interesting because 10 of us were in the room and 10 wrote blogs basically about topics that they were totally theirs to choose. There was no direction to this other than that broad question. Pretty much everyone wrote about issues that they felt deeply about, yeah? And they felt deeply about issues that you could actually describe as being social justice based. Now this is interesting because here a group of people, most of them were in fact employees of Ultimate Software, who perhaps 20 years ago, had they been given this task, would have talked about things that related to their job, such as the tech or the technology or the products or services that they as employees are in effect being hired to support or sell or develop or use and so forth. But that wasn't the case at all. We asked people a question, what do you care about? And the topics that came back, if you recall, were things like suicide prevention, mental health, yeah, diversity, inclusion, injustice in people not getting paid properly and being delayed in their pay, so they have to take out payday loans. That was Joseph's blog, you know. And so I began to see that what we're seeing now is a conversation that's taking place where the new tech, basically, which is converging, which includes the social technologies of connecting people, is starting to engage us back into this idea that we're seeing things from the wholeness of things. And what got me started also was probably about 18, 20 years ago when I became aware, because of my HR background, of the increasing challenge we had, or if you like, the crisis we had around employee engagement. You know, it was the Gallup group were the first group in the world to talk about engagement and to research it back in the early 2000s. And their research showed that the most engaged people in the work are first engaged from the heart, not the head. And only 15% of the workforce in the world was engaged according to that definition, heart first, you know, 18 years ago. And you know what, Gabby, after 18 years, the Gallup data is saying it's exactly the same. Only 15% are engaged at work. And that began to make me think about what this means. I mean, we've got away with low engagement in our organizations for years, but the reality is we now live in an age of innovation and rapid change where societies and humanity and commerce require every single person to be engaged in the work to co-create the future. And that means to be engaged from the heart. And so in a nutshell, what does this mean? Why did I write this blog? Because I see injustice in the world. I see inequality. I see people who don't have access, fair access to things. I see a world where we've divided things into the parts, where we divide life and work, where we build our health systems around the services, not the individual. And I think, and I
Right.
want to be part of a group that puts that right. Yeah, that's why I wrote it.
And in your blog, you state that there are different aspects of equity, and that it's not just about, equity at work. So, for example, people not being able to afford their mortgage, to save for their retirement, people not having fair access to health and social care. Can you talk to us a little bit more on this?
So it's the idea of the connection between things now. So I'm not a technologist, even though I get rated on these top 20 lists as a thought leader on tech, and it does make me smile because I've never been taught in tech. But I'm trying to understand where tech is going and why is that important? Because it was Klaus Schwab, who's the director or the chairman of the World Economic Forum, said a couple of years ago that the new tech, the 4IR tech, the digital, the social, the analytics, the artificial intelligence, machine learning, all this stuff that we're looking at and using now is doing something very, very different than any of the tech has done previously. This I call it the new tech, is bringing about the convergence of things. Convergence means bringing everything back together as it should be. And why is that important? It's important because 300 years ago, we had the first industrial revolution. Well, what that did, it took work out of the community. It took work out of the marketplace where people came to work and where they did life and work together, all wrapped up. You knew people, you connected with them, you ate meals with them. It took a whole family to raise a community to raise a child, just as it took a whole community to raise an apprentice at work. And what we did, we replaced that with the factory model of work, which put everything and the focus on the factory, not the individual, in which you started to use the technology then to inform the process and the machine. And we lost the focus on the individual, and we also broke things down. So we separated things.
Yeah.
So we've had 300 years of separateness where we're not supposed to talk about life at work. We're supposed to switch off things. We're not supposed to talk about health. There's anything to do with work. Now everyone's talking about mental health as though it's a normal thing to talk about, but you can't separate mental health in terms of what happens at work from what happens with mental health at home. So I think we're now moving into an age of convergence, and while the tech is converging, right, and while we're also seeing people start to talk about these things by way of the fact we're connected on social media now, we still live in societies, we still live in organizations, and we still live in the services that are constructed for us, such as medical and health services, which are based on the factory model. For example, if you think health, you close your eyes and think health, most people will think building, they'll think hospital. They won't think they won't see a picture of a vibrant individual as a member of a thriving community, because that is what I mean by the future of health equity, where each individual thrives. So there's a shift in the way in which we look at things, but it comes back to this idea of how do we get back to convergence? How do we use the tech to enable us to track that journey? But it's not about the tech first. It's about a vision and a story for a community, the restoration and extension of community where every individual thrives.
Right, and just like you mentioned, work cannot be separated or balanced with life because it's such a big part of our life. So
life work. So we used to talk about work-life balance. Well, I think there's a bigger idea now. It's called #LifeWork. You think, Abby, about your smartphone, right? So you're what I call Generation G, right? Generation G, early 20s, brought up with the smartphones, brought up with a piece of kit, if you like, that can do a number of things. And also you've got your life work data, not all of your data, your life is much more than what's on the smartphone, of course, but in your data, you can use your phone, you can use that for work, right? And you've got data, or you can use it for your social connections or other data in relation to your life as well. You don't separate these things. You don't take two phones to work and leave one at
it's
reception.
all one, exactly.
Right? Exactly. And because the data, so data is ubiquitous now. It's converging. what is missing in this conversation now is the story, because human beings have always thought and learned and thrived together by storytelling. And I think what we were doing with that blog series, when I was doing the blog series, I was trying to write stories, and as hosts, we were writing stories both about injustice, what's wrong, what breaks your heart, but then what delights your heart. And in every case, those delighting your heart stories are based on an individual story in which individuals then thrive and connect with others.
Right. And no matter, no matter if you say that, work and life is separate, you can't separate that at all. Everything influences that happens at work, that happens at home. So it's all one at the end.
For example, I was due to be in Hong Kong in about 3 or 4 weeks' time, facilitating an appreciative inquiry summit with a global engineering company. That's now been put on hold because of the virus. Now all things are connected. Now in the past, and I was talking to so there's a host team that's working with me to have a conversation around designing the summit experience for a bunch of people coming into the room in Hong Kong. But a couple of them are younger, and they were saying, well, they were quite cross about this, saying, we've got to do something. This should never have happened. It shouldn't have never have got out of control. What can we do? And they're having conversations about this. So if that starts a movement, then at some point that will have an impact on hopefully on authority and decision making. My point being that all things are connected, and we also now have the power and the ability as individuals to engage in conversations about what's wrong and what could be right. And that's why I talk about in the blog about how we need to bring the non-usual suspects into the room. I think the reality is also that I talk about health equity, and the reason I wrote the blog about health equity was also because if you think about it, 3/4 of the blogs that we wrote as a group, around social, around suicide prevention, mental health, and so forth, diversity, autism, and so forth, were all to do with health, but they're also all to do with work. And we are a group of non-experts. I'm not an expert on health. I'm not a trained doctor. I'm not a head of clinical services for Hospital B. But I'm an individual who has a view, and other individuals have views as well. And so that's where I think we're seeing now people starting to talk about these things. The other point to make about the new tech is this, and I'm not quite sure it's fully understood yet. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I'm exploring it with us and with others. And it's this, that basically, in a nutshell, technology has been developed in the past for the organization. Ultimate Software is a company that still produces tech for organizations such as payroll services and HR. But the new tech is also doing something very, very different. It's putting the technology into the hands of the individual, right? So the individual has the ability then to get access to their information. We still live in a world where most people don't have access to their health records, which is extraordinary. That's going to change. It's changing now. I'm seeing something happening in Europe now. But it's not just about having access to something. It's about the idea of partnership, co-creating as equal players. So health equity means that the ability to enable each individual to partner with the experts around using the data to inform, to ask questions, to co-create the future, whether it's future of work or future of health. That's a challenge for our experts. And I was talking to a colleague of mine in the NHS in the UK, which is going through some challenges, and they have a lot of conferences, but you're saying that we always get the same suspects in the room. We get the health experts, and we need to get the non-usual suspects. And that means the ordinary citizens of the world to come together and to co-create. That's a challenge for the health experts. But you know what? We know now with innovation, for example, that the best way to innovate is to bring people into the room who don't ask the same questions you do as the experts, and then you start to release a kind of wonder and creativity. But you also get this idea of the individuality of things.
Right. And this is what you're saying right now is practically what you mean when you say that our current health systems have no such view of people from the wholeness of things. Are correct?
They don't, and so I mean, my wife was recently in hospital for a knee operation, and great hospital, great people. Yeah, that's not the point. The point is that I think 25 different people touched into her in a space of 2 days, and each one had to pick up the case and read the notes, and it was like a handoff every time.
Yeah.
But it was also a clinical view of the knee. It wasn't a broader view of who she was as a person or her well-being or whatever. Now, there were some doctors in there that took a different view, and they took a much broader view. But you present for many medical people, you present as an individual. The other thing that to point out is that we have tended to see not just health, but organizations have been, leaders and managers have been taught to see people and organizations as problems. So we have a 300-year diagnostic model of business and expertise. So we look for problems. We use the language of diagnosis and problem solving, and we break things apart and we look to fix things. The idea about the blog series is that we were writing together was not just to say there's a problem, but then to move beyond the problem into the idea of looking at what works, looking at what's possible, and that means looking at the best of something and looking for the examples of where things work. And the thing is that you've got to break down the barriers, break down the silos, and bring us together as communities and sectors, and with ordinary people to say, where is something working? Where can we learn from that, and how can we extend it?
Yeah, and I mean, if anyone is interested in reading any of those little parts of all of the blogs that everybody from our social room wrote, they're actually in Jeremy's blog in his LinkedIn, the one we're interviewing him about. So if you're interested, in going to those specific blogs that each person wrote, you can definitely go in there so that you can know more of what we're talking about. But Jeremy, so can you talk to us also about the blog series that you wrote with Professor Manish from NHS?
So Manish Kashyap is professor in the NHS pool organization in the UK. I had been writing about 3 years ago about, so let me just take a step back. What aspect of convergence now, I think, which is very important, is to understand that the kind of issues facing facing society, facing humanity, require people to come together, to collaborate at scale, in order to look at these issues and come to collectively work things out together. That's what I mean by bringing the non-usual suspects and with the usual suspects into what I call the rooms, the two rooms: the summit room, which is the physical, strengths-based innovation and priesthood inquiry summits, but the social room, the connection between people around causes. And I talked about the social room, and I was talking about 3 years ago about Generation G, the young workforce members born from '93 who, like you, Gabby, wired for collaboration in effect, because what collaboration requires is an openness and ability to connect. So if you think about basic things like Instagram or Facebook, well, not basic, they're powerful. They're open systems of collaboration. Anyone can join for Instagram, and immediately you're connected with anyone around the world. There's no hierarchy, right? It's not based on your job title. President of Mexico doesn't get more access to Instagram than a cleaner in a factory. It depends on what they want to talk about and how much they engage on the site, right, and so on. But Manish was is like so many people in the national health system in the UK, passionate about the NHS, passionate about the future of health, recognizing that the conversation is about money and about efficiency, but there's so much more. And also he, when I began to write about Gen-G, sort of called me when I was in London and said he wanted to write a series of articles for the UK Guardian around engaging the young people in the UK as a form of national service, to be co-opted into the NHS, you know, to provide, you know, the sort of to fill the gap in labour, and we began talking about this, and so after a few conversations, we shifted the idea to the strengths-based approach, which is what if we could engage their hearts and their heads? What if we can engage not just their hands, but their ideas to co-create the future? Because a lot of health is about prevention, not just about what happens after. Because you think about health, what happens when you go to a hospital, it's when health is broken down. If you think about that, health is broken down when you go to hospital or you go see a doctor. And so much more can be done to prevent that if we shift the lens from having communities responsible for health, where people look out for each other, where people are connected with each other. You know, if people were connected, there'd be less mental health. If people looked out for problems, there'd be, if people were providing jobs for each other, if people were sharing and giving, and you know, as a community, there would be less health problems.
Right.
And so we began to write a series, and it was a call to the NHS to change the language, change the conversation from what's not working to the appreciative inquiry conversation around looking for the positive core of the NHS, but a call for engaging the non-usual suspects in the room through social media, building a social room conversation where the British public are now engaged through the hosting of young Gen-Gs like yourself. Every time I see you, Gabby, I get inspired by you because you are the future. You have a different perspective than when I first joined the workforce way back in the dark ages in the late 70s, and because we were taught to switch off our heart when we got to work. You wrote a blog about suicide prevention, right? And it was Suicide Prevention Week a few months back. And you wrote it, and there's no way years ago I could have done that in work, but you wrote it, quite a beautiful blog, but it was from the heart. And it was a call for collaboration and a call for people to come together. So in a nutshell, what the NHS series was calling for was the future of the NHS as a social movement, where we look to engage people as equal players in the room to create the future of health in the UK. Through convergence.
No, go ahead.
Through convergence. Converging means bringing people back together.
Yes.
And I look at behind you, there's a sign there. Behind you, there's a sign called People First. And you know, that Trudy Wonder, your colleague at Ultimate Software, who is what I call a social native. So Trudy, social native is someone who sees social media as a genuine collaborative tool in daily life work, as a way to connect with people who believe what you believe. And so she and I are social natives. We've been together in the social room on LinkedIn, on Twitter, particularly for about 4 years. And she was following initially the journey of my son, Tom, who had terminal brain cancer, a GBM to type 4 lethal brain cancer.
And that's how you both got connected, right?
We both connected, yeah. And I'm sure Trudy's mentioned this, but her sister had died of brain cancer, was dying of brain cancer. There was an affinity between us. So we weren't talking about the technology at Ultimate Software. We weren't talking about the services of emotional economy at work. We were two individuals coming together to share a story about love and pain and hurt. And I shared the story that Tom was responding to a global international trial, which itself is a collaboration between the usual suspects and the non-usual suspects in the room. And he now has a son, and that then led to conversations around what I was doing in the UK, starting up a social room with the Civico, the City of Birmingham, looking at the homeless, looking at providing jobs for ex-offenders and so on, bringing some of the best young talent in the UK to work on this, you know, and because of causes they believed about, they were cared about. And so we began to have this conversation. And at that time, I was also starting to try, and I began to realize that there was a need to try to articulate where the tech's going for people, ordinary leaders, ordinary managers. We're all just trying to get on with life and try to work out where to go and stuff like that. And there needed to be a new toolkit and a new definition. So people first, I thought, yeah, I love this term. And I did more exploration about Ultimate Software and found you guys work for a company that is rated as the best place in America to work for in tech by Forbes magazine. You know, your founder, when you're based in Miami, right? So just north of Miami, and when I arrived in Miami, you know, there's a series of buildings, and the first building is called Phase 1, right? And because that was the vision that Scott, the owner, had, that there'd be more phases. So Phase 10, what's it now? Phase 150 or something? Got no idea. You guys are big, but there's a I believe that Scott, there's a motto in Ultimate Software that says, you know, we will be known as a company by how we treat our lowest paid employees. Mm-hmm. Now, that is amazing. What that is a statement about what I call second stream leadership. So first stream leadership, or first stream, there's two streams in the future of work, first stream, second stream. First stream is the continued use of the tech, including all the power of the new tech, to continue the factory model of work in a nutshell. It's the work to continue to put the factory at the center, the machine, the process. People are not at the center of that. So therefore people are dispensable. If you automate, automation is both first and second stream, but in first stream, automation is used to reduce costs, increase profits. That's the sole driver. As a result, people are dispensable. Organizations, leaders don't have a concern about people's jobs changing. They think it's not their responsibility to get involved. Right. People look after themselves. It's a dog-eat-dog world, mate, isn't it? So we've got to fight. It's a survival. It's a deficit world where we're in competition. We can't collaborate. We've got to fight each other. So why care about people? Period. That's number one. That is first stream. Second stream is different. Second stream says there's all this tech coming on board now, which actually has the capacity, as Klaus Straub says, to augment every individual. Wow. And so what that does it mean? It means you don't start the conversation with the tech. You start conversation, digital transformation, whatever. You start with a fundamental question. Who are you? Who am I? Who are we together? What difference are we going to make to the world? Mm-hmm. How can we make a legacy difference together? Then what's the tech going to do? How can the tech inform us and enable us to take that journey well? The tech doesn't inform, the tech doesn't create the story of the future. It's our coming together because of who we are and the difference we want to make together. And it starts with the individual. The first stream starts with the organization. It always has the organization at the center of the tech. That's the old health model. It's a current health model too. Health services are built around the hospital. And you go to a hospital and you listen to the conversations in a morning briefing with doctors. More often than not, they talk about how many beds are empty today. They don't talk about people, they talk about beds. How many beds are filled? How many beds are available? So the focus is on the efficiency and the organization and the throughput in the factory. But second stream talks about the individual. It says, we are going to put people first. That's why I'm collaborating with Ultimate Software. It's got nothing to do with come work for us and be a thought leader. That's not the case at all. Conversations which truly were, what if we were to engage some of our people in the kind of authentic conversations around how they could be social natives on social media and come together to collaborate to make the world a better place, right? Of which you're part of that, Gabby. Yes. And so what this is really, what brings it all back together, it's fundamentally about this. Anything we do in the future, you can't organize human labor with more than 5 or 6 people without some sort of authority system. But that authority needs to move from the hierarchy now to the collective. responsibility, where it becomes a living community. The community itself takes responsibility. So I think so in second stream, the new organizations which maximize the potential of the digital and other technologies will be organizations which start with the individual.
Yes.
And they bring other individuals together and say, what can we do to make a difference together? Where the collective creativity that creates new innovations and new ways of being together, which transcends single enterprise employment and which become a living, ongoing global life work community. And Ultimate Software is a company that has come from and had elements of first stream. I've worked most of my life in organizations where we focus on the organization. The language is still about the organization, the profits, and all that stuff is part of business, sure. But Ultimate Software is a leader in second stream thinking because it's exploring about the fact that, you know what, we are as a company, that is Ultimate Software, interested in making the world a better place. And that means collaborating with people who are not the usual suspects. So for example, take the Equity at Work social room in LinkedIn, which we are engaged in now, but as well as others. Now, we only started this for about 6 months, but about 600 members. There's an extraordinary range of wonderful people in there from all sorts of different aspects of life and work. But there are also some competitors for Ultimate Software. There are people in that room who are naturally competitors who would, if you were a first stream mindset, wouldn't go anywhere near the Equity at Work social. How would you possibly collaborate with a competitor? That's a deficit world. But in a second stream world, it's abundant. You say, no, there's a bigger idea here. We need to bring us together. We need to collaborate. Collaboration is a bigger idea now. How can we bring our talents together to make the world a better place? And even if we compete in some areas, that's okay. Or we can learn from each other, or we can share, and we can be generous with each other. That is a people first philosophy, and it's a philosophy around equity. Because if you do not believe in giving, in being generous, in seeing every single person as being uniquely talented, you will never see equity. But so it starts with a philosophy, a story, and then that we pull the tech through on that basis.
Thank you, Jeremy, for sharing that. I would like to see if there's any questions from people, or if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and write your question in the question and answer box. I believe you can find that in the middle bottom. So if you have any questions for Jeremy, just leave them there and we will go ahead and answer them. We will give you a few minutes to see if there's any.
For Gabby.
Yes. And hopefully everyone that's in this interview has already joined our Equity at Work social room. Jeremy, I don't know if you're able to see the question that was just written here, but there's one question from Nancy. It says, what do you see as the biggest barriers to achieving convergence?
Starting the conversation with the experts. I think this is why I think the social room is so important, because the social room is how we connect. As social natives, we look for people who believe what we believe. We look for the people who are the early adopters, who get what we believe, who want to put their hands up. I mean, I live in Melbourne, but 9 times in the last 2.5 years, I've gone to the UK and America, responding to conversations with people who believe what I believe, if you like. And so together we start to explore what this could look like. I think it's a movement. I think it's about looking for the stories. Who are the organizations and leaders who will put their hands up, who will get this and want to, as we say in Australia, give it a go, because they believe in the philosophy. That's why I think a second barrier, Nancy, would be that we need an articulated philosophy. Yeah, we need the principles, right, around second stream. And that's one of the things I'm hoping this year to see us in the Equity at Work social room, because it's really, Equity at Work is simply as after this conversation, it's obviously it just can't be about equity at work anymore, but that's just a holding pattern, if you like. It's about equity. So I'd love to see us to come together this year in particular, start to create a set of principles, as well as a challenge to leaders around the world to engage in these new conversations with their people around taking their own road into the future, because you can take responsibility for the future. You don't have to wait and be compliant for others to tell you what the future is going to look like. You can choose that for yourself. Mm-hmm. And you do that by collaborating, by bringing more stories and strengths into play. So I'm really hopeful about that. I'm confident about it. But it does mean that we actually recognize that collaboration at scale is the key here.
Yes, and where there's stories, people connect.
Stories matter.
Let's see if there's any other questions before we end. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any more questions. All right, well, Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your blog with us. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone that attended this interview. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you being here. Just letting you guys know that this was only the first Behind the Blog interview out of a series of interviews coming in the future. So just please stay tuned. We will be announcing when our next one is. So just be attentive to the social room. And if you haven't joined our social room yet, then go ahead and do it. I promise that you won't regret it. You will have a family here where you can collaborate and talk a lot of different aspects with. So yes, join our social room for a broader conversation and collaboration. Thank you for everything, Jeremy.
Cheers, Gabby. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.